All right, welcome everybody to the August 5th Octant community meeting. Today we have a few things. We have a demo from the authors of the Jenkins-X plugin that we're actually going to start with. Then we're going to get into what we're prepping for the O.15 release, which will be coming out later this week. We're going to get that released, and then we're going to talk about what we got coming up after that. So I guess I will just get started right away with the Jenkins-X demo. So James and James, but yeah, so James Strachan, James Strachan is going to do a quick demo of the Jenkins-X plugin, which we had actually talked about at a previous when y'all published the repo, we mentioned it at a previous meeting. So yeah, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. I'm going to stop my video just because I don't have the best internet, and I'll try to share my screen. There we go. 2 seconds. Okay, so hopefully in classic presentation style, can you see my screen?
Yep. Yeah,
awesome. So this is the Octant JX plugin. Everyone here knows Octant, so I'm not going to describe Octant. I'll just talk about the Octant JX plugin. So the JX plugin is basically a plugin that tries to visualize as much of what's going on inside Jenkins-X as we can. It's still fairly early. We've only spent like a couple of weeks on it. Already it's pretty awesome, and we're hoping to extend it to be the full UI for installing Jenkins-X, upgrading Jenkins-X, managing Jenkins-X, as well as just pipelines and using it. For those who don't know, Jenkins-X is basically automated CI/CD for Kubernetes based on Tecton. So let's switch to Octant. So here's Octant. It's running in the Kubernetes cluster. That's a pretty empty cluster. I've just installed Jenkins-X version 3, which is just about to be released as alpha. You might notice these couple of icons down here. The one right at the bottom is the operations view for people administering Jenkins-X, which I won't show you right now. It's still a bit rough and ready. But I'll show you the main developer views. So there's a bunch of views that are basically visualizing Jenkins-X specific resources mostly. So I'll start with the environments view. Jenkins-X has a bunch of environments: development, staging, production. These are places where when you create apps, they get deployed. The development environment, these are all currently shared inside the same cluster. So there's only one Git repository right now, which deploys to dev, staging, and production. If you have multiple clusters, you'd have separate Git repositories. So this is the source code that defines all the apps that will be deployed via tools like Helm and whatnot. Another view shows the repositories. So these are the Git repositories which have been imported into Jenkins-X, which we've enabled CI/CD. So in other words, we've registered webhooks. So when you change these Git repositories, CI/CD happens via Tecton. So here's a quick start, which is just a very simple Go microservice. You can see how totally awesome it is. It prints some stuff, and I'll use that in a second. Then we have the pipelines view. So the pipelines view is the main bread and butter of this plugin, where you can watch all the different pipelines running in your cluster. Just to make it a bit more interesting, I'll edit the source code in GitHub, and I'll show you how a pipeline triggers. I'll say very awesome. I'm going to be really naughty, and I'm going to No, let me be real. I'm going to create a pull request. I'm going to create a pull request to change this awesome message that's going to appear that says very awesome. So I'm going to say fix more awesome. I'm going to create a pull request. So I'm going to propose a change and then create a pull request. So we've created a pull request on this source repository. This is all kind of Jenkins-X stuff for a second. What that's going to do is trigger a pipeline. We'll see the pipeline trigger in a second. There's a pipeline started. If I go back to the pipeline view, we'll see a pipeline that started here. I can filter on the repository here. So let me just show just this Git repository. So we'll see the pipeline has started, but we could just use this view to look at all the pipelines across all organizations, repositories, branches, bills, and status, whether succeeded, failed, or running, or whatever. Now this view is okay for just seeing what's going on. If you want something a little bit more interesting, you can click on that link, and this shows you all the steps that are occurring inside that pipeline. So, for example, this one, I could click on this link, and it takes you to the Octant Log view for the step that's running in Tecton. So I can look at all the container logs for all the steps that are running in Tecton. And each of the pipelines are a Tecton pod, and I can click on this link here to look at the pod. So if I click on this view, this is the traditional classic view of a pod in Octant. Just wait for it to load. So this is looking at the pod that's running the Tecton pipeline, which is pretty big. There's lots of container, there's a few init containers, lots of containers. Each one of these containers is a step, and it can be quite unwieldy looking at this because Tecton is so kind of complicated. And the events at the bottom are really handy for when things go bad. To make things a little bit easier to understand, when you're trying to diagnose a step, sometimes you're working on a Tecton pipeline in Jenkins-X and it does wrong thing, or it failed for some reason. There's this little envelope icon. It's not the best icon in the world. If you click on that one, this shows you a step view, which is kind of like a simplified view of what was the container doing for that step. So these are all the volume maps that are happening inside the pod. These are the environment variables here. There's quite a few. This is the name of the step inside Tecton, which is a Tecton thing. This is the container image that ran the step. So you can see, this was the Kanaka image from the Kanaka project. And if I click on that link, because if it's on GCR or it's on the public container registry, ECR, Docker Hub, we can link to the actual container, which is really handy. And then there's the actual command that was running. So this gives you, within a couple of clicks from this page, we can navigate into the logs for a step, the detail of a step, and obviously see the step. There's a bunch more links as well. If you're a Jenkins-X person, we can click on the pod as we've shown, so see all the steps, see the logs of the whole pod. There's also a quick link. Let me shut some of these links because it's looking confusing. The other times. I can do a quick link to the source repository that triggered this repository, which triggered this pipeline. Or I can look at the pull request directly, which is really handy. So basically from this apparently pretty simple UI, this is all implemented in a couple of panels with some markdown. From this relatively simple UI, we can navigate to almost everything that's going on in Jenkins-X and in Tecton, which is really, really awesome. Now this is just the start. I'm sure we can make this much nicer. As we mentioned before, this could use some of the nicer views from the Clarity CSS. We could maybe do timings a little better. There's a little bit of tooltip there, but it's not the most awesome visualization. We can maybe use a nicer widget for timing and durations. One thing I've always wanted, it doesn't quite work yet, is when the pipeline step fails, it would be awesome to open the terminal in the pod. And it doesn't quite work. There's an awesome terminal tab in Octant here, which is awesome. And it works for almost every pods I've tried, but for some reason it doesn't work for any of the Tecton pods I try. But for every other pod I try, it works beautifully. So being able to open a terminal in a step in a pipeline would be super, super awesome. But yeah, never mind about that. So that's mostly kind of it. Oh, I should just show you that that pipeline I just triggered here. If I go back to the pipeline, this was a pipeline I just triggered. And if I click on that preview link, there's a link to the application that's running. So there's the very awesome. So this is the microservice that's just been deployed in a preview environment. So I can try it out before I merge to master. And if I go back to the pull request, we'll see before we've merged this change to master, we've got a comment on the pull request on GitHub. And again, it's sort of linked to the preview. So we can access the preview from either GitHub or Octant. So we tried to kind of link both UIs together, so you can either look at things from GitHub or from Octant. Over time, it would be kind of nice to do more links, so we could maybe link this pipeline view to Octant possibly, using say a local host URL or something. So you could, if you're running Octant locally, you could browse from GitHub to Octant directly rather than going through a running app. But that's kind of mostly it. So we can look at repositories previews, we can look at running apps in an environment. So here's all the current apps that are running. We're hoping to grab a bit more of the Helm metadata so we can show icons and whatnot and show home pages of apps. Here's the ingresses for the apps that are running in this namespace. We've got a little Helm plugin. In Jenkins-X 3, we're actually kind of moving away from doing direct Helm deploys, and we tended to use kubectl. So a lot of the Helm metadata doesn't exist. So there's only one Helm release in this example. But the main UI is really about pipelines and visualizing the pipelines, and go from here to navigate into an individual pipeline, or filtering the pipelines by environment or whatever, or by branch that you might want to see, just the releases or whatever. But that's pretty much it. Any questions at all on anything?
Not so much a question, but just a comment. I think so. If I understand this right, when you're looking at the pipeline view and you're looking at a build, the if you had one that had failed, I guess you called it the task, the envelope icon. You could take that and you could go to your local machine, pull that image into your local Docker, and then essentially copy and paste that command and execute it. Okay.
Yeah, there's actually a couple of issues on the Octant JX. So if I click on, so here's one that's failed, for example. So if I click there, I can see the log that's failed. So that's the failure. Oops, let me go back here. And if I click on here, I get the detail of the step. So here's the environment variables and here's the map points and whatever. What would be really nice, and there's a couple of issues already for this, is a link on this page that says, if you want to try this locally, either natively on your laptop, create all these environment variables using export this equals that, export this equals that, export this, and then run that command. Just so you could run it locally, or do a Docker version of this, spin up a Docker container locally with this image, with this file system and this environment variable, or you can maybe even repeat this by doing a kubectl run, and again, same kind of thing, passing all the stuff. So literally it's just a couple of pages for some text we could copy and paste again as we're developing. But just having that, because doing a search replace on this to add the export statements and the quotes around is just tiring. So yeah, I'd like a little bit more to make it easy to reproduce a Tecton failure and diagnose it locally. Another thing I'd love, which would be totally awesome, it's been discussed inside Tecton of having a way of pausing failed pipelines. So if you can get the pod to fail, you can then just kubectl exec into the container in the pod that's failed. And it's all right there, right? All the environment variables are there, the file system's there, everything's right there, so you can just run on it. And if we could figure out how to open the terminal on that pod, which I'm sure is a fairly straightforward thing, I haven't looked too deeply, because terminals work perfectly on every other pod I try. It's just, it could be a Jenkins-X thing, it could be a Tecton thing, I'm not sure. It could be the bash versus
that's probably,
versus
yeah, that's exactly it. So we just default to sh, and if it's not there, it's not there, and it won't work. So it's probably something we can do with either allowing the terminal to be informed of. We used to have this, and we took it out because it was a little confusing, but some intuitive way to say, like, try this list of things, or let the maybe let the user define what thing to try from the case of like a plugin. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm desperate for that, by the way. That would be totally awesome. What I often do when I'm debugging stuff is just edit the pipeline and do a sleep. And then you can SSH in, kubectl exactly inside. But having the terminal view in Octant would just be totally awesome. It would just look super slick. It would be really, really cool.
I mean,
I wonder if there's a way of passing in the shell, maybe. Like maybe
that's
there's
what I was
a
going to
URL
get to,
or query argument or something, or
it would be really nice.
Way.
It'd be really nice if you could just from right here. I really like what you were talking about of, like, if there was a button there and you just said, give me this and essentially exec this, and then drop me into a terminal.
Yeah, exactly. Like a terminal link here or something.
Yeah.
By the way, this UX isn't awesome. Maybe a drop-down thingy would be good or something, because really this is the breadcrumb, and these links are kind of tacked on the end. It should maybe be a drop-down on the right, maybe, or buttons or something. I'm not sure, but that's a slight UX fail. But it was just a quick way of getting those links on the page. But a terminal link here, which could link to essentially the terminal tab on the pod page, like this one, with optionally specifying the bash or shirt or whatever the terminal.
Yeah, whatever the entry point is, right?
That would be just amazing. I'd be desperate for that for the longest time. Like an easy way to open a terminal in the pipeline. That would be totally awesome.
I wonder if you could maybe have like a check if there's a magic annotation or something on the pod to say that describes the shell or something.
That's a great idea. Yeah, we could annotate the pod and say the shell is this, and then just get Octant to take it from the pod.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'd be open
Yeah.
to supporting that.
At some
Yeah,
point,
that's
we're going to add the preferences too. So this might be a good candidate to be stored in like a global preferences, and so you can change it
Yeah.
from the some kind of preferences UI.
That sounds awesome. Oh, just another thing, by the way, about this whole UI. Right now, this was just like the quickest thing we could do just to get something really useful that the Jenkins-X community can kind of use. The ideas behind this UI could work with completely vanilla Tecton. So if you're not using Jenkins-X at all and you're just using Tecton, it should be pretty easy to patch this UI so it would work with vanilla Tecton. The implementation right now is slightly cheating to visualize pipelines. It's using, there's a custom resource in Jenkins-X land called a pipeline activity that visualizes this kind of flow. We should be able to, if I show you pipeline activity, where is it? There it is. These are the pipeline activities, which is the thing that actually implements the visualization of the pipeline. If I show you, say, this one, and then view the YAML. So this is the actual CRD that the UI is based off. We should be able to reuse almost exactly the same code and use vanilla Tecton pipeline tasks and task runs and those kind of things. So I'm hoping to make this completely generic to Tecton as well as Jenkins-X. It's just the quickest thing to do was just make the Jenkins-X version. But we should be able to handle either completely vanilla Tecton or Jenkins-X and Tecton. Because I noticed there is a Tecton plugin right now. It's fairly simplistic and it's mostly for visualizing metadata of Tecton CRDs. But I'm hoping we can kind of build like a reusable pipeline view that works for both because it's the same Tecton under the covers. We just slightly cheat with this CRD. It gives us a like kind of an easier way of visualizing what's going on. But we could easily generate this in the plugin rather than having a CRD. So we can use the same kind of view, if you like, whether it's vanilla Tecton or not.
Yeah, Jason Hall is the one who did that initial prototype of the Tecton plugin, and I'm sure he would be interested in getting having this work with just generic Tecton custom resources as well.
Yeah. Another thing I found amazing, by the way, with Jenkins-X uses lots of jobs, like cron jobs, garbage collection jobs, and all this kind of stuff. This is still pretty early days, but we've got this little operations view that just shows kind of jobs. I don't know about you, but I've always found cron jobs in Kubernetes really kind of icky and hard to understand and whatever. And being able to just re-trigger jobs from Octant is so super nice. If a job fails, you can just retry it and look at the logs of all the jobs and whatnot. It's so hard, so easy to miss that a job is failing or whatever it is. So we found that even just the current jobs UI in Octant to be really, really useful. But we're hoping to make a real dedicated UI to help people install Jenkins-X from scratch, view the installation happen, iteratively, and then diagnose when one of the many different things inside Jenkins-X goes wrong, like an upgrade job or a garbage collection thing, or if your cluster's getting out of resources or whatever. There's a bunch of other issues that I'm hoping to dive into soon. That's not really anything to do with Jenkins-X, but it's just stuff we use in Jenkins-X. So we use something called kubehealthy and external secrets. So external secrets and kubehealthy. External secrets is an awesome plugin. If you've never used it before, it's a way of managing secrets, but storing them in something like Vault or Amazon Secret Manager, Google Secret Manager, Azure Secret Manager, any of the secret managers. So it's a way of dealing with secret stores, which for GitOps is a godsend because you have to deal with like seal secrets, which are kind of a bit icky to work with. So these are brilliant, but we could just do with a visualization of the CRD that these are based on. There's a CRD called an external secret, which shows, and using secrets and external secrets, we could visualize what secrets are populated, what are valid secrets, what need entry. We could even have a UI for entering secrets to, update a password or a token or whatever through the UI. So I'm hoping for an external secrets plugin fairly soon. And kubehealthy is another one. kubehealthy is kind of like a generic Kubernetes health check tool. And again, it makes CRDs that visualize health checks, which are extensible and anybody can build a health check. And it would be really easy to make a really lovely health check page that just visualizes KubeHealthy health checks, but shows them in a kind of a nice way, so you can see, lots of nice green ticks, and if something's red, you can zoom in on it and sort by, red and whatnot. Maybe some donuts. So yeah, those plugins would be super, super awesome as well. So I'm hoping we can gradually grow the Octant community and get more people in the Kubernetes ecosystem hacking on plugins, because it's so much fun. It's so fun writing plugins because they're easy. You get a quick return. You're not lost in Webpack hell or any weird stuff like that. It's really easy. So yeah, I love Octant. It's awesome. Great job.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for the demo. This is awesome. Yeah, this also makes me think of some of the longer term ideas we have around allowing plugins to expose that so like, say there was a KubeHealthy plugin, allowing other plugins to know that that plugin is also installed, and then being able to say, I want to use its view in my plugin. Yeah,
a link to it. Like I know I can link to it because I know it's there.
Yeah,
and that kind of stuff. Yeah. There was
Which
a
we
thing
don't
I
have
think
any
I mentioned.
right now, but.
Yeah, I mean, but it's already awesome. But I mean, we could just keep gradually improving it in a few ways. One thing I'd like the idea of is, I think I maybe rambled about this on Slack recently. I'd like it if, like, this navbar gets huge pretty quick, and having a switch in this navbar for everything the navbar is great. I can switch to anything there. That's awesome. It'd be nice to almost have a little breadcrumby thing here where, if I've got, each plugin could have 5 views each. If I just want to switch between the 5 views in one plugin, have I don't know, drop down or something here.
Yeah.
So you could do switch navigation, quick navigations between a subset of views, and then maybe different plugins could link to other plugins, so related things could be together rather than having this big thing over time. I mean, I love this, and I love the fact that it's expandable and it's meaningful and it's lovely. It soon gets quite big. At some point, we might want a way of, I don't know, maybe having different contexts or something that you can maybe show subsets of this or something, or maybe a plugin could show a subset of this and then we could expand back to the whole thing, or I don't know, something. But yeah.
So would horizontal tab work for that instead of breadcrumbs?
I found, I guess navigation is hard, right, in general. Let me show you an example. I might be looking at this pipeline, and then from here, I want to look at a pod. And then now I'm looking at a pod, but now the pod is in the workloads place. But now we've kind of lost the breadcrumbs of where I was.
I see. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's kind of, I mean, I'm talking like nirvana here. I'm talking like, the perfect Octant eventually. It would be awesome if a plugin could embed bits of the classic Octant views, but in its own kind of navigation here a little bit. You know what I mean? Like taking over the breadcrumbs a bit or something like that, so that we can navigate into these places, but then we can kind of go back again. But yeah, I should maybe use more tabs in the Jenkins-X plugin. I should try that out. But yeah, navigation is tricky. I think little drop downs would be if we just had a slightly richer breadcrumb thing, I think that would go a long way to making things better. But yeah, we can play with
This is actually really interesting. So I hadn't actually thought about the desire to want to take like a summary view and then have it be under your own navigation in a plugin. But it makes total sense, especially when you look at it in the context of something like the Jenkins-X plugin here, where your pods are part of this, it's part of this build step, and all these pods are a step in that process. And you might just want to dive into one in more detail. Navigating away from the plugin context into the default Octant context kind of breaks that, I guess, immersion, for lack of a better word. Like you're no longer in the plugin experience, you're now back in the Octant experience. And honestly, I don't, and someone else on the call can yell at me if I'm crazy. I don't actually think it would be that hard to do because of the way we render our content. I think we could probably expose a plugin endpoint that was something along the lines of, like an embed content response, where you pass us the path and we send back the view, like the view, and then you nest that view in your view components.
Yeah.
Right. Because all of this stuff just gets rendered and fired back as JSON. And so, and right now what happens internally in Octant, you set the content path, and then our path matchers match that to, it says, oh, okay, well, it's the namespace JX, it's pods, it's this, and it has this name. So we're going to generate the summary view for that pod. And the API could take that same type of path. So in the same way that you've created a link to it, you would pass it the path, and then we would just return the view, but you would have to then pack that into your view component list.
It's like an iframe, basically, right? I mean, not from an implementation point of view, just imagine having an iframe where you can specify, I want to see my pod details inside this frame.
And then because of the way we render the view, where we just loop through and we render anything that's in the JSON stream, in theory, it would just work.
Yeah.
We could try it and see what happens. I was pondering about on a similar so I love the pods view and the deployments view, but in a lot of clusters I look at, it's kind of big. Like if I look at pods, often if you're looking at pods, you have a lot. Like a lot of pods, like I've only got 13. This is quite a small cluster. I've only got 13 here, but fairly soon, like if you've got 20 pipelines running at the same time, you have huge amounts of pods, and there's different ways you could kind of group things to then navigate to pods. So I could imagine like there's the apps CRD that's starting to be used where you can group deployments and resources together by app. So I could imagine one day having an app CRD plugin that shows you like the high level apps. Like I've got 3 apps, and one of the apps might have 2 deployments, and those 2 deployments might have 3 replica sets. You could almost do a tree kind of way of grouping your pods. It's still using the pods views, but it's kind of putting them in a slightly different tree.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's what we're slowly working on that. Like with the top link there, the workload viewer. And the nav bar, which shows the the donut graph, and like it's just like a snapshot of the application. That's eventually where we want that to go. Is you click there, and this is like you could have thousands of pods, but what you're seeing is just the individual applications themselves, and then you click on that, and that takes you to more like the resource viewer instead of all your individual pod views. The issue that we have now is that this right now is just based solely off of owner refs and labels, and so like you can see here, it just shows all the pods individually. It doesn't like group them into logical like components.
Yeah, Jenkins-X manages to mess up this view a little bit because it's Tecton really. All the Tecton pods look like an app, which is slightly over the top really, because each one's totally separate. So it'd be nice to maybe figure out a way of grouping them as just in a big pipelines app or something like that, or whatever. But and on the Jenkins-X perspective, for example, we have a company called Lighthouse that has kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bits that are different deployments and things and controllers and whatnot. It'd be kind of nice to have slightly higher groupings, so we could group deployments together into a higher level construct. But it's already awesome, but all these things would be even more awesome. Cool.
Well, yeah, this has been excellent. Does anyone else have any questions or comments before we move on?
I just want to say this is totally awesome. I think this is my favorite plugin at this point. So nice work.
Thank you.
You win. Good job.
Awesome. Beverages on me when we meet in real world.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thank you. Yeah, this has been great. Really appreciate it. And I was telling folks earlier, we're doing a new thing on the octant.dev website where we're going to have a featured plugins. So you'll be the first post for featured plugins, and I'm going to use that. If it's okay, I'm going to use that video that you sent me earlier and embed that with the blog post as well.
Yeah, perfect.
Excellent. All right. Well, let me share my screen and we'll move on to release talks. Let's see, which one is it? Is it this? No, it's not that one. Go. There it is. Okay, so we are going to start prepping for ODOT 15. This is a smaller release. We're trying to get back into committing to that kind of 2-week cadence of putting out releases. This one has a couple of useful fixes. One is the context selector. Right now, it puts an ellipsis there, but it doesn't. It just keeps the prefix. And so, like for example, all of my prefixes look the same. It just says witzel3 at ... and I have no idea what the actual cluster is. So Sam did work here to fix that. It now puts the ellipses in like the middle, so you can get some good context and actually makes you able to switch between clusters. The multi-kubeconfig bug that was reported, that was a regression. That's going to get fixed in this release. And then there was some work from Scott Andrews. He added the Webhooks view, which was under this API server menu. We've renamed that to just the Webhooks menu. But the API server links that you will see in the resource viewer as a result of this will still work. The API server as a menu entry wasn't like super useful. It was like too much of the low-level detail being surfaced up. So we put under webhooks for now. We want to address the issue of the menu bar potentially becoming long and like pushing things down and making it hard to navigate. We don't have a good pattern for that quite yet. We're still thinking about that, but we know it's something that we'll want to take care of in the future, especially as we get more plugins. And if you had 10 plugins installed in Octant right now, you're doing a lot of vertical scrolling to try and get to things. So yeah, that's just something we know about. And then the stepper component, which was recently merged in, is a Clarity component that lets you kind of build out a form wizard. You can do requirements like validations on the fields. It uses our standard set of Clarity form fields and just packed into JSON that gets rendered out into steps. That's supported both on the for both internally as well as plugins. There's a unmarshal addition, so plugin authors will be able to guide users through steps and then process those forms. The stepper component itself has an action handler that you assign to it, and then you would, for plugins, you just handle the form in your action handler. And did I miss anything in this upcoming release? Sam, Milan, Scott? Cool. All right. And so then moving on to what's next. So we're going to be doing some planning tomorrow. And part of that is there's a whole host of bugs that are a little annoying right now. There's some UI jitterbugs where there's some UI bugs where like we put in this loading menu, which is helpful. It indicates that there's stuff going on, but sometimes it can flash the old screen before the new one gets presented. And when it does that, if the new one is presented quickly, you barely notice it. But if it's like a really big resource that takes a while to load, you can be on that old view for like 2 or 3 seconds, and it can feel like it went back and like nothing is happening. So because the loader disappears. So we talked about it, and I think there's a couple options we're going to explore for how to address it, both on the server side and the front end side of things. So that's one of the big ones we want to get fixed. I also want to give some attention to operating in restricted, like RBAC restricted clusters. I really want to get us so that we're kind of degrading gracefully. And I think the solution that we've ended up at is right now we're trying to be really smart and like, oh, we'll retry and we'll back off and then we'll retry in case the credential changes and you get access and all this. I think what we'll end up doing for the first pass, just to get people a much better experience, is if we try and we get unauthorized, we just cross that resource off the list and we don't try to access it again until they explicitly refresh their context or switch to a new one, right? It's like your thing expired. When it refreshes, we'll try again, but we're not going to try to do all of this incremental back off and like guessing and figuring things out. We're just going to, try it, get unauthorized, cache that we got it unauthorized, and then return empty for that type until they retry. And we're going to tie that into some of the work that Sam did, because with the combination of being able to upload a kubeconfig and watch for the kubeconfig changes, which was already there, we're able to now, we can actually alert a user, which we don't do now, but we can alert a user that their kubeconfig has changed and suggest that they switch contexts or reload. Right now, I think you have to fully like replace the file to get that to happen. But if you just like stand up a new cluster and it injects a new context, we show that context in the menu, but we don't refresh the current one. So there's ways that we can watch for the file to change now, because Sam has code in there that's watching for that file to be created. And we can leverage that same, maybe leverage that same code or refactor it so that we can, so that if you're looking at a cluster and your access goes away, and so we'll alert you that you tried to view pods and it's not accessible. And then when your helper puts in a new cert, we can say, hey, your config's updated, click here to refresh it. Maybe we can do it automatically, but for now it might just be a manual, as long as it's telling the user exactly what's happening. The other set of bugs that we have are mostly around just like little oddities that I want to make sure we're actually digging into and exploring. CPU spikes for certain views and just resource usage and general kind of slowness and things, like issues that are a little hard to kind of dissect and take some actual investigation. A lot of those we don't get to when we're working on other features and smaller bugs, because we don't want to take time away from those larger features. So we're going to just put an investment into kind of knocking out some of these bugs. Previously to these last releases, our bug volume, our issue volume kind of grew at the same rate that we were burning it down. And then lately our bugs have kind of gone up faster than we've been burning them down, but we're still adding features. So it's time for us to just kind of do a bug triage release. So that's what you can expect after we get the 0.15 release out.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure, yeah, that's the part of the meeting we're at now, is open Q&A.
Awesome. You mentioned when you were just talking then about alerting a user or notifying a user. Yeah. Is that something that's, maybe I should probably have looked at more of the docs, but is that something you have there at the moment? I was just wondering, because I'm just thinking from a pipeline perspective, it would be really nice to be able to say, okay, something's failed or even passed maybe, or something, having some kind of notification things. But also when we get into like things like Kuba health reviews, there's some kind of attention needed to be able to draw you to that perspective. Is that something that's possible now or in the coming?
Sam?
So at the moment, it is currently not possible, or at least through plugins. I am working on it right now. It's actually coming along. I don't know. I can't promise that it'll be squeezed into 0.15.
Yeah.
It might have, the code might, I might have a PR made by the end of the week, but it may or may not be reviewed by then. But it is certainly in the works, and there is already an outstanding issue for it. So multiple users have requested for this particular feature.
Brilliant.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
That sounds awesome.
Any other questions? I guess I was going to say, if either of you want to create, it would be really helpful if you created issues for like the drop down menu, UI, and so just like features that you would like to have, please create those so that we can, get them in our backlog and get them prioritized.
Kind of said it before the call, before the recording, but fantastic job. It's amazing, Octant. James has been telling me for years to try and get involved in some UI work, and I've just always been so horrified by getting into all the different web frameworks and everything. And I had to go and actually put together a view myself within an hour. So it was kind of like, a hallelujah moment. So fantastic to everybody that's been involved.
That's great. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's wonderful to hear.
So you need to make another view now, James.
This is true. Well, I mean, this is the great thing. We've got so many integrations with Jenkins-X. I mean, James had 2 there. It's just once we get over the initial, we're working on an alpha for JX3. Once we get past that, it's basically just extensions and plugins. It's just creating a good experience. And we've always struggled from a UI point of view. We've heavily used CLI, but that's changing now. We can just go heavy on the UI, and it's fantastic. So, thanks, Octant.
All right. Well, if there is no more, then that's it. Thank you, everyone. James, I really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks again. And I'll see everyone next week.
Cheers. Bye.
Okay. Bye.